Hello and welcome to World Talks. My name is Sasha Farbach. We now turn to Serbia, where tensions have escalated as months of anti-corruption protests continue, raising serious questions about government response and the country's path to European Union membership. Joining us now to analyze it all is Toby Vogel, co-founder of the Democratization Policy Council. Thanks so much for joining us here on TVP World. Good morning.
Good morning, Sasha.
I want to begin with a bit of a wider snapshot here. I mean, we're looking at 10 months of intense political protests, anti-corruption protests. We've seen also violence flare up as well, more and more. Where are we right now? Is this a tipping point for Serbia? Give us your take on this.
I think you may well be right that this will turn out to be a tipping point, or perhaps a fork in the road, where given current developments, the current direction of travel, I think President Aleksandar Vucic will soon have to decide whether to intensify even further police violence and repression against the protesters, the student-led protests, or agree to early elections and also make sure that they're free and fair, which is not a given in Serbia's current political and social environment.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned President Vucic there. How do we take also what we've seen increasingly as a very harsh crackdown by the government? In a recent interview, I think it was in the last 24 hours, President Vucic for Euronews said that he's open to dialogue. He said that he's ready for that in that sort of format. How do we reconcile those two things? Is he genuine in that? And it looks strange with how the government has been cracking down in these last weeks and months.
I think Vucic has always played this game of rhetorically being on the side of, reform, a pro-EU path, all those things, while actually further and further restricting the civic space in Serbia. This is not a new development. This has been happening over many, many years with the acquiescence of the European Union and other Serbian partners. And Vucic has been somewhat skillful at presenting a moderate face to the outside world while being an increasingly autocratic ruler back home in Serbia.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned the European Union there. I mean, if we're looking at this, they've been observing this, rather cautious, not really coming down in harsh rhetoric or action. Why do you think that is?
The official explanation that you will hear here in Brussels is that if we criticize President Vucic too hard, he will switch his allegiances over to the Kremlin. That is sort of the standard line that we're hearing. Now, Vucic has been playing this balancing game between Moscow and the West, as it were, for many, many years, with different degrees of success at different points in time. He has done things, concrete things, that sort of anchor him in the European Union, that have bought him a lot of goodwill. He's done a €3 billion deal with France to buy fighter jets. He is opening up the country's considerable, significant lithium reserves to exploitation by EU firms. He has also let weapons and ammunition quietly go to Kyiv, to Ukraine, all in order to, among other things, buy time and goodwill from the West. And I think in that game, he's largely succeeded. At the same time, he has been very close to President Putin. There's no doubt about that. He has said at various points things to that effect. He has acted to that effect. So this balancing game, I think, is something that the European Union, its institutions and its member states find quite difficult to deal with, and they have been quite clumsy in approaching the matter.
Mm-hmm. Also, this balancing act, I want to follow up on that as well. It's also, I think, internal. I mean, there's also with that recent interview as well, he said that Serbia's future is with the European Union. But there's also a poll, I think, conducted by the International Republican Institute in Serbia that says only about 40% roughly of Serbians really support EU membership. So again, is he also pursuing a path that a lot of his people don't want? How accurate is this poll? I mean, we've seen also the journey of the students really going, showing their support of Europe with the bike trip and very public sort of demonstrations of that. So where is Serbia's heart in all this, really, in your view?
Well, about this last point, the European Union really has shown the students its cold shoulder. I mean, it's as simple as that. The European Union wishes these protests just disappeared. It wishes to go back to the status quo, business as usual. And the pull of that is very strong in policymaking. On the broader point, I do think that these polls are accurate, but public opinion is not formed in a vacuum. It doesn't just happen. If you read the media in Serbia, which are largely under government control, direct or indirect, they are full of venom, hatred against the European Union, against EU figures, against the member states. For example, framing the ongoing protests as a Western-led, intelligence-led attempt at regime change, at violent regime change, a color revolution, instigated by Croatia and Germany and intelligence services and all that stuff. There are other narratives about, the EU will force its liberal values on Serbia, on a traditional society, and we don't want that. Those narratives are present in the mass media every single day and have been for many years. So it's no surprise that ordinary Serbs are feeling very ambivalent about the European Union.
Mm-hmm. And also about that civic engagement, we've seen these student protests. I mean, also their support seems to have grown as well. Give us your take on that. And one thing that sort of seems, as for observers, largely absent is a kind of leadership on the student side. I mean, one thing is protests, and they've seen that they can do that. But what does happen in the near term, in the middle term, for that future movement politically? I mean, without leadership of any individuals, do you see that continuing?
Well, that's really the core question here, isn't it? The student-led movement started relatively modestly, but building on popular anger at corruption and mismanagement and all that, following this collapse of a canopy at Novi Sad train station 9 or 10 months ago. The students have been very, very good at building constituencies and at really turning this into a mass movement. It is no longer simply students, it is no longer simply students and professors, it is no longer simply sort of the intellectual urban classes, if you will. It's become much, much, much broader than that. It's no longer focused on Novi Sad, Belgrade and a couple other cities, but on smaller towns really across the country. So that is a great success for the movement. But you are right that as a political force, of course, it remains completely untested. It is quite diverse internally, as you would expect. As a movement, it is not necessarily ideologically coherent in any way. But so far, I think the movement has played it very well, not getting enmeshed with the current opposition parties in the Serbian parliament, but to stay, putting a bit of a distance between sort of ordinary politics, parliamentary politics, if you will, and their own agenda. Mm-hmm. How sustainable that will be if Vucic eventually agrees to free and fair early elections, should he do that, that remains to be seen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not to put a final point on it, putting distance. I mean, as you said earlier, President Vucic, this is a man who is right now very much in control, balancing the superpowers. He's denied that he would extend his presidency. Do you think that's realistic if we look at the future? I mean, I know this is the big question here, but how do you see his genuine, let's say, statement in that direction?
I'm reluctant to speculate about this because there's various scenarios that could play out. And one of them that we haven't discussed so far is, of course, exporting regional instability into Bosnia-Herzegovina and into Kosovo. That would be definitely an option for Vucic, were he to try the more autocratic path and really dig in and try to defy this movement. I do not believe anything to be genuine coming out of President Vucic's mouth unless he actually follows up on it. So making a declaration about X is quite meaningless. He has a long history of making grandiose statements and announcements, and then nothing happens. So whether or not he's genuine in this, I do get the impression that he's quite nervous. You can see that in his TV addresses. He no longer looks as invulnerable as he looked until a few months ago. And I think that gives you a sense of how deep this crisis is and how genuine the anger and opposition among Serbian citizens to his 12, 13-year rule has become.
Mm-hmm. Interesting point as well you made, looking out at the slightly larger region. You mentioned also exporting instability. If we're looking at Bosnia-Herzegovina, struck also by what's happening in Republika Srpska as well with Dodik and that pushback against him. Has this sort of clipped also Vucic's ambitions in any way? I mean, there's been far more significant political blowback against Dodik there. Is this also an indication that this might also push back into Vucic himself?
I think that the two situations are very different from each other, and the posture of the so-called international community towards them is very different. But of course they are linked, and what could happen is that Vucic decides it's in his interest at this point in time to push Republika Srpska to the brink, to test the West's resolve, to distract policymakers from what's going on in Serbia, and then to sort of swoop in as the big peacemaker. That is not the fantastic scenario. That is conceivable. Mm-hmm. Likewise, in Kosovo, it might be in his interest to stoke tensions and to engineer some kind of violent incident, where he can then go in and present himself as a constructive, moderating force.
Right, and let's hope let's hope it doesn't come to that. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but look, it's been really insightful. Much appreciated. Thank you for your time there, Toby Vogel. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for watching. That concludes World Talks, but there's much more coming up right here on TVP World, so don't go away. Goodbye.